All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. It's Friday. It's a little after 4. Hey, let's do some Pathfinder Friday. Today, we're going to take a spooky journey. I hope you've got your flashlights and a weapon of choice to protect you, because we're going to the land of Nidal. In the chat, Lori has deemed me to be Zon-Kuthon, which I really like that. Amanda and I were laughing about that the whole time. To have this spooky journey through Nidal, we've got the foremost expert. Amanda is with us today. Amanda, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dan, for having me.
I sometimes wish you could hear the stuff that we talk about before we stream, because it's mostly whenever Amanda and I get together, we end up talking about horror movies or like different things. And so we're talking about different horror movies that are kind of reminiscent of the different parts of Nidal. And so maybe what we'll do is kind of recap that towards the end, talk about some of the movies and stuff that might be good, because I like talking about that stuff. So all right, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dan, for this lovely conversation that we're about to have about sunshine and rainbows and eternal torment at the hands of Zon-Kuthon. Who doesn't want to talk about that?
Some of the images you sent me.
I sent you a lot of images.
Buckle in, folks. There is some stuff coming that is it is something. It is really something. Yeah. So I'm excited to get to stuff like that. First of all, should we start with a warning or anything like that?
I think so. I think it's worth noting that this is a discussion about Nidal. It does cover this book here that came out last year called Nidal, Land of Shadows. And there's a content note at the front of this book that lets readers know that it is about a theocracy dedicated to a lawful evil deity of pain, loss, torment, and darkness, and that there's a lot of depictions of torture. There's a lot of body horror that is both described and illustrated, which we'll see later in this show. So if those are things that make you feel uncomfortable, feel free to skip this episode, because there will be some darker things that we'll be discussing. So we just wanted to give you the heads up early on.
Yeah, we're not saying it's super gross or anything like that, but it does have some pretty intense stuff in there. Yeah. So keep that in mind. Consider that a little bit of a warning. So first of all, let's talk about. I have a map to show, but I can only find a low res map, so we might need to talk through some of the areas in there. Sure. I got a really good map from our guy Tony in the art department, who is awesome, helps me out all the time. But there was no tags on it, so I really wanted something with tags. So the one I found is a little low res, but it should give you an idea of where Nidal is. So let's talk through some of the places that we're seeing here, just to give folks a little bit of spatial awareness of where this is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've got the Mindspun Mountains. Is that what it's called?
The Mindspin Mountains.
Mindspin Mountains across the north, I think. Is that what that is?
Yeah.
And then along the south, there's another region of mountains that I honestly cannot remember what they're called.
Yeah, so the Mindspin Mountains go around the top, the northern part, and down to the east. And then there is a pass that is in between that and another range of mountains to the south that's called the Umbral Basin. And that is a not fun place if you're a player character, where there's a lot of high-level shadow giants. There's some rifts to the shadow plane in there as well. And that is actually a dangerous but effective passage between Nidal and safer places like Multhun to the east there. So there are actually some sort of freedom fighters that are taking slaves from Cheliax, a nation that's associated with Nidal, and to the south of it, through Nidal and then over to safety. So there's a lot of very dangerous, hazardous actual terrain in Nidal, as well as places where there's just lots of creepy, spooky, shadowy things.
And the creepy, spooky, shadowy things are what we're gonna start talking a little bit about.
I hope so.
So let's start. Right. Let's start with the history of Nidal.
Sure.
It has always been a scary place full of danger and Zon-Kuthon and all of that stuff, or did it have a better past?
So it has been for a very long time. It has been for 10,000 years. And those of you familiar with the Pathfinder campaign setting might realize that an event called Earthfall happened 10,000 years ago, and that is when a massive meteor struck Galarian, blotted out the sun, and destroyed most life on the planet. And Nidal, the civilization, predates that event, and it was a robust nation of horse lords that traveled around and were nomadic, and was a very thriving civilization that had many different tribes and pockets of folks who were doing their thing, and they were thriving, and they had leadership that was very wise. And so they were also about divining the future, and they had elements of Desna that they were associated with the traveling, and using astrology to sort of predict the future.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, and so they were peaceful. They were certainly not associated with Zon-Kuthon at all. And then they got wind that there was going to be some sort of calamity that would happen to Golarion, and they started using their rituals and traveling around the nation to get a sense of where a place of power might be that they could find out more about what was going to happen. And they had a very grave sense of foreboding that all of their people were going to be wiped out. And at that point, there were the three main horse lords who were involved in that, the leaders of this pre-Nidalese Nidal. They encountered a shadowy rift in what is near the Umbral Basin. And they had, again, a very bad feeling. Their advisors all told them, there's something terribly, terribly evil there. Don't go investigate what's happening. And the horse lords felt like they had no choice. And then they said, if we don't follow this siren call of what's happening, we may never find a way to save our people. We might all perish. And at that point is when Zon-Kuthon started assaulting all of their minds with the call to bow down to me, swear fealty to me forevermore. You and all of your descendants, I'll protect you if you'll be mine. And they didn't quite understand exactly what that would mean, but then they made that decision, and that was the beginning of how they became Nidal, how they became Kuthites.
So then, if in a way, if it wasn't for Zon-Kuthon, would they have been wiped out?
Yeah, they would have been.
So in a way, he kept his word. He protected them.
And very literally, for those three horse lords, he actually, he came to them in a vision, and he touched them, and their eyes went black, and they lost their humanity. They lost their mortality as well.
Oh, no.
And they became eternal servitors of Zon-Kuthon, the voice of Zon-Kuthon, to his now chosen people. And those individuals have persisted this entire time. They're called the Black Triune, and they're the head of the theocracy of Nidal. And so they went through, and they were actually gifted a ritual for creating members of the Umbral Court, which is then the aristocracy that also still persists to this day. So the same actual individuals who made this pact with Zon-Kuthon 10,000 years ago are still leading Nidal, and they've gone through many, many pains and rituals to try to make sure that nobody actually knows what their identities were. But in this book, we reveal a little bit about who they were. We don't say their names, but we give a little bit of their backgrounds if you pay attention.
So, okay. So, because of Zon-Kuthon, the horse lords are able to survive, but they're not horse lords at this point. They go through a drastic change, I'm assuming.
They do, yes.
So then, once we get to that point, then does that attract more followers of Zon-Kuthon?
It actually does.
Nidal?
Yeah. And so the rest of Golarion, in the weeks leading up to Earthfall, got wind and heard, and in fact, they disseminated information that we are a sanctuary, we'll be protected for whatever's happening. And so those folks who had some premonition that there was going to be something that happened, whether it was through magic or through their own deities, or just noticing that there was an exodus out to Nidal, they would flee their normal countries. There's lots of folks who came from Varisia, some folks who came from, what was Cheliax, some folks who came from all over the place, and they brought with them all of their knowledge and their histories and the things that they wanted to preserve. And once they got to Nidal, they then got subsumed by this shadowy group, that's now sworn fealty to Zon-Kuthon and is now the chosen people of Zon-Kuthon. So the lore about the nation and the humans, the book goes into it, but their skin's very ashen, and they've lost sort of all sense of what their when this happened, they lost all sense of what their previous cultures were, and they became this conglomerate of worshippers to an obsession with Zon-Kuthon.
It's amazing when it comes to like the Umbral Court and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Are all the members millennia old? Can you have new people join? Is it constantly getting new members and things like that?
Yeah. So it's not clear exactly how many members of the Umbral Court there are, but we've said that there are dozens, if not hundreds. And the book gives some examples of some specific prominent, powerful members of the Umbral Court. Lots of them are undead, so they have been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. There's 2 specific vampires who are mentioned in the book who are very cool individuals. But there's actually a ritual that we give in this book for when you have advanced in the theocracy enough, when you are a chosen follower of Zon-Kuthon, somebody who's risen in the ranks in the church, you can become a member of the Umbral Court, and the ritual involves a whole bunch of other Umbral Court members reaching into your mind to find what it is that terrifies you the most and what sort of pain affects you the most, and perpetuating that on you and essentially cowering you and breaking your spirits. We're talking about fun things here today. And then when that happens, of course, you have to swear fealty to Zon-Kuthon forever. And you get a lot of powers from that. You get some regeneration, which is a big deal. You get some damage reduction, and you get immunity to spells from the Shadow Subschool. Yeah, with the Shadow descriptor. But it comes with a big catch. If you, as a member of the Umbral Court, having gone through this ritual and having been chosen, if you commit any offense against Zon-Kuthon, that's considered sacrilege, as decided upon by the universe and the lawful forces of the plane of shadow where Zon-Kuthon is from. There's a 25% chance every time you do or think or say something like that you just get plane shifted into Zon-Kuthon's deific realm, Joyvaken, which is a place that you don't want to be, and you get tormented for the rest of eternity. So great power, but
and
don't mess up.
I feel like and I'm sure there's more stuff that's going to come up also, but for a homebrew, there's just so many good potential like threads there that you could throw into a homebrew that just sound really fun, you know, but not fun, but fun, I mean,
I think it's fun.
I think it's fun too. I think it, it's like, it's horror movie fun. It's like, it's scary and it's creepy and all that stuff, but it's spooky. It's just a lot of spooky fun. So, okay, so let's talk about, cause I have one of the first images that I looked at when you sent me the images to put in that I loved is this one right here. It's just gorgeous. It is absolutely gorgeous. We're looking at a capital city of some kind in Nidal.
We are. That is Pangolais. That is the capital of Nidal. That is the seat of Zon-Kuthon's power and the theocracy dedicated to him. That's where the Black Triune lives. That's where most of the members of the Umbral Court are based, although there are some who are based in other towns and cities and places of importance to the theocracy to make sure that people stay in line. That's where the Shadow Callers are trained, and Shadow Calling is a chosen form of magic dedicated to Zon-Kuthon. That's all about casting spells with the Shadow Descriptor and dealing with all sorts of creating shadowy illusions, and in general just sort of using the powers that Zon-Kuthon bequeaths to his chosen people to keep everybody in line. And so there's a measure of indoctrination that happens as well when you're a Shadow Caller, because you are an agent of the state, essentially, and all that happens in Pangolais. Okay,
and then one more thing I want to show, and you pointed this out right before the show started, is that the character that we're looking at, they're looking out over this awesome panoramic view, is actually a vampire.
She is.
And I don't know if you can tell on screen or not,
yeah.
But the one that I had, I can actually look, because it's high res and it's a giant image, that there's actually blood in the goblet in front of her.
There is.
And it's dripping down, and it just looks really amazing. So
it's beautiful art. It's one of my favorite pieces that we've ever published.
I can see why. It's amazing. So moving on from there. So now, what historically, what is the how does everybody else view Nidal as far as what's the word, like relations, like foreign relations, or I don't know. I can't remember. I don't know the word I'm trying to think of. But when it comes to working nicely with the land of Nidal, how do other towns and cities and lands view that?
most places, particularly those ones that are geopolitically near Nidal, see it as a place that you don't go. See it as a place where they don't necessarily have laws that say you can't go in there, and there aren't necessarily laws in Nidal that say you can't come into the country if you're not from here. However, it's very much a place of no return. And the Kuthites are extremely powerful, and there have been times where there maybe with their small-scale invasions in which paladins go in there from like Malthun, for example, and they just don't come back, and they're never heard from again. And that's happened enough times over the course of the nation's history, combined with how old of a nation that it is, and the fact that, it's fairly well known that its leaders are these immortal, almost demigod type of beings, that other nations just don't want anything to do with it. And they're very closely allied with Cheliax, which is also a very large evil empire that's associated with Asmodeus. And so there's a sense among a lot of goodly, particularly neighboring nations, that if you mess with one, you sort of mess with the other. And while Cheliax is much more understandable because their hierarchy and their laws are at least fairly public knowledge, Nidal is just a black curtain. People don't know what happens there. There's not information that's disseminated about what they're doing or what it means to be a member of the Umbral Court or what it means to advance in the church or to be indoctrinated. They just don't. Nobody wants a piece of that.
Right. As Steve said earlier in the chat, Nidal is one of the oldest lands in the world.
Yes.
There, and so that leads to things like this, like the library.
Yes.
That has a written history that goes deeper than just about any library. Is that right?
It does, and in fact, it is the library with the oldest records in existence in the Inner Sea region. And the reason is because we were talking about that period of time between when Zon-Kuthon bestowed his blessing upon the Black Triune and the Horse Lords and the people of Nidal. There was a time that elapsed between that and actual Earthflaw in which there was an exodus of folks from where they were from into Nidal to try to become refugees, to try to survive. And when they brought all of that knowledge with them, they brought it in written form. They brought all their books that they could handle. In some cases, there were scholars who were writing as they were traveling into what they thought would be their refuge. And so that Icebow Bridge Library that you just showed is where those written records are stored. And so there's things that, go all the way back from really just sort of the beginning of written history in Galarian all the way up to Earthfall that don't exist anywhere else. And so if you look at that illustration, that's another really fun illustration because you'll see that there's a ceiling on top of it and that there's a celestial layout of bodies up there. And that is meant to be what the sky looked like sort of the moment before Earthfall happened. It's the only known depiction pre-Earthfall of what astronomy looked like,
Really?
of what the universe sort of looked like, what the heavenly bodies looked like before everything changed.
That's amazing. So I wonder, because there's two things. Is that number one, I want to talk about what enlightenment and what the path of someone that follows Zon-Kuthon would look like and all of that sort of thing, and then we'll wrap it up with a nice look at Zon-Kuthon himself, which is I'm super excited to show that. I gotta be honest, I'm a little worried about showing the next image because it is really kind of disturbing. But
is it the gross one?
Yeah,
it's the gross one.
So buckle in. But what I want to do is I want to show the image, but I also want you explained it perfectly to me what is happening in this image, and so I think that might be a good spot to start with about what is actually going on here and what that means.
Sure.
So
is this the one with two figures or one figure?
This is just one figure.
Okay, excellent. I know what it is.
One happy person.
Oh, Dan, what an appropriate
look at
statement.
that happy person right there.
Look at that little guy. He's so happy.
So what is exactly going on with this individual that we're looking at right here?
All right, sure. So worshipping Zon-Kuthon takes many forms, but in most cases it requires a lot of suffering and a lot of pain, and sometimes inflicting that on other people, sometimes inflicting that on yourself. And the highest form of worship of Zon-Kuthon is to basically torture oneself to the point of reaching a higher plane of existence. It's a very evil concept, right? And so you become a joyful thing when that happens, because you have pleased your God in such a way that you have reached the highest echelons of the religion. And so that creature that you just showed is indeed called a joyful thing. That is what happens when you undergo the ritual. That is one of the higher rituals in the church. All of your limbs are amputated, and you are basically put in a place of honor within a cathedral to Zon-Kuthon, and wrapped in his holy or unholy, as they were, chains. And the ritual and the fact that Zon-Kuthon is pleased and has blessed you as one of these creatures imbues some magical abilities on you. And so these are given these creatures are given a very high place of prestige within a physical church of Zon-Kuthon. Most main cathedrals to Zon-Kuthon in the nation have a joyful thing there, or one nearby. The cathedral in Pangolais, the main place where a lot of the indoctrination happens, has an entire room full of joyful things. And so one of their abilities is that they can wrap their tongue around people and detect their thoughts and know how pure their dedication to the god is. And so a lot of hopefuls, people who are trying to join the church, are tested in that way by these joyful things. So the novel Night Glass by Leanne Marcel, who wrote much of this book here and is our gaming guest of honor at PaizoCon right here. She writes a very visceral scene early on in Night Glass, where the main character, who's training to become a shadow caller from a small village in Nidal, he travels to Pangolais. His name is Azim, and he is brought before a joyful thing with his cohort of would-be shadow callers. And so there's just this very visceral scene of the joyful thing being revealed, in all of its glory there in the cathedral, and wrapping its tongue around each individual student and, saying, "You're worthy. Your fear, I taste your fear. Your fear is pure," or, well, you're not really dedicated. You just want the power, or you're not, you've got too much good in your heart.
So not only you've
been judged.
You're getting licked by this joyful thing.
You're getting licked.
But then on top of that, it's like reading your beads. It's like, oh, you're lying about this, and this is where you're dumb, and this is what you're doing wrong. So it's kind of like, it's just two slaps right in the face, where like, not only do I have this disgusting thing,
that's right,
slathering its tongue all over me, but
right.
now it's going to tell me my ultimate truths that maybe I don't want to know.
That's right, yeah, in front of
awesome. I love
my
that.
friends.
And again,
Nidal, a great vacation location.
Nidal, everybody. Nidal. And again, Leanne will be at PaizoCon, guest of honor.
Yes.
At PaizoCon this year. So, and Steve's right. He said that he struggled to read Night Glass the first time, but then became one of his favorite Pathfinder Tales books, and I can see why. I think that it's kind of amazing. Yeah.
Honestly, it really is, and I was extremely excited to have Leanne be the primary author on this book, because she wrote Night Glass, she wrote a follow-up novel called Nightblade. She built much of the canon that existed before this book of what Nidal was and what the rituals were like and what the church was like, and really just, I think, made a very clear picture of just what this lore is and what it's like to be here and to go through some of these things, and really just brought that concept to life. So getting her to write the lore parts and the background and the history of a lot of this book is, I think, a really big win for us, and we're extremely fortunate to have her join us at PaizoCon. We had several other authors on this book as well, who I want to call out. Liz Liddell, one of our editors here at Paizo, she wrote the adventure locations that show up in chapter 3 of this book, and the bestiary was tackled by Mark Moreland, who's our franchise manager currently, and Ron Lundeen, one of our Adventure Path developers.
Yeah.
So great stable of folks
and
to write this book.
Liz is going to be joining us soon.
She is. She is. May 1st, I think, is her first
She'll
day.
be in office.
Yes.
So exciting.
I know. It's great. I'm so excited.
So I can't believe how fast time has gone. We have like 4 minutes left in the show.
Oh no, that's what happens when you have me come talk about Nidal.
Every time you're on the show, I always look over and I'm like, oh, it's almost over, So I love that. But let's get to the man of the hour. Let's get to Zon-Kuthon.
Oh yeah, my buddy, right there.
I mean, this is the talk that started the whole Cenobite thing. Like we started talking about Cenobites with looking at this image. Let's talk about Zon-Kuthon.
Yeah. All right, so Zon-Kuthon was not always this dapper gent that you see in front of you here on the screen. Zon-Kuthon is actually one of the oldest beings in the existence of the cosmology of Pathfinder and Golarion. Zon-Kuthon was originally, and still is, the brother of a goddess named Shelyn, who's our goddess of love, beauty, art. She's a very Aphrodite type of figure, and he was her goodly brother. His name was Umbral, and he was one of the original deities who helped to wrestle Rovagug and trap him so that he couldn't destroy all of existence. And so that happened, and he played a very important part in the early cosmology of the universe. And then he and his sister started to not get along, and he became very jealous of her in the fact that he felt like that she was always getting more attention than he was. And so he basically...
every time.
Yeah, he basically took his toys, and not only did he go home, but he left Golarion, and he went to a place beyond and behind existence, as we like to say. We're very coy about where exactly that was.
Where did he go?
He went to a place that I'm not allowed to tell you, where James Jacobs will just bust down this door like the Kool-Aid Man.
The door just breaks open. He's like, "Oh no!" And then he knocks all the cameras.
Amanda, no! Yeah, pretty much. Yes. So he went there. He went beyond and behind existence, and nobody knows what happened. We're also very coy about what happened during that time period. But when he returns, he was Zon-Kuthon. He had all of the trappings of all of having experienced a lot of pain, a lot of torments, being obsessed with violence, wanting to just hurt everybody around him. And the more they cared about him, the more he wanted to hurt them. He and Shelyn battled for quite a long time, and she was devastated to have lost her kindly brother. They came to a truce eventually, in which she stepped aside and said, I can't do anything more about this. He is who he is now. He did a ton of terrible things early on when he was Zon-Kuthon, including he trapped and tormented his own father, a spirit wolf named Thrawn, and warped his flesh and made all sorts of nasty things happen to him, and actually bound him to be his own herald. So he captured, tormented, humiliated his father, and in the back of a book called Inner Sea Gods, you'll see that there is a stat block for the Prince in Chains, who is the defeated version of his father, Thrawn.
No way.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's awesome.
We have art of Thrawn, of Prince in Chains in Inner Sea Gods.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And so all of that happened, and Abadar, the lawful deity, the neutral lawful deity, as opposed to Asmodeus, who would just be like, throw him in hell, said, all of these crimes that have been committed against morality and existence can't go unpunished. Zon-Kuthon, you shouldn't have done that stuff. You need to get away from everybody before there's, like a war of the gods, basically, over these things that you've done. And so Zon-Kuthon, playing the long game as he does, didn't fight back and said, sure, okay, all right, but I want something from the first vault, which is the repository that Abadar had all sorts of things held there, important things to the fabric of the universe. And so Zon-Kuthon said, all right, I'll stay in the shadow of Plane for as long as the sun hangs in the sky. You won't ever have to worry about me again, and I want the first shadow, the first undead shadow from the first vault. And Abadar said, okay, well, I don't see how that could be a problem. You're never going to come back. We'll let you do that. And so Zon-Kuthon stayed in the shadow plane until the sun no longer hung in the sky. And that's when Earthfall happened. And that's when he came back and said, I want a country now. And then Nidal happens.
And then that sort of thing goes on with chains and smoke and torture and I mean, really, it is a compelling story. It's a great arc, you know.
It's a mythology, and we were able to build on the mythology in this book and reveal details that we had never revealed before about how exactly the pact between Nidal and Zon-Kuthon happened. That story about him, emerging from a rift in the shadow plane and coming to the Horse Lords in a vision and touching them and creating them anew as the Black Triune. That's all brand new mythology that you can only read in this book. You can also read it in the wiki, but it is written up here as a very sort of mythological, sort of almost biblical type of story.
Yeah.
But with pain and torture and Zon-Kuthon.
typical Zon-Kuthon things.
Yeah,
you know? So before we wrap up and get to Q&A with the finders in the chat, if you're putting a homebrew together and the PCs are going to be running through Nidal or having an extended stay in Nidal, knowing you, they probably would stay for a little while. What are some of the highlights of the land that you would have to make sure that the PCs always run into?
Oh gosh, I really think it depends on the level of the PCs.
That's true.
I do not think that it's appropriate necessarily, unless you do lots of really cool little hijinks, to put a first level party in Pangolais, for example, because of all of the really high level clergy of Zon-Kuthon that's just everywhere. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But I think, having a party go to like a small village. There's a number of small villages dotted across the countryside in Nidal. The village of Crosspine, which is where the first Leanne's first novel takes place, Night Glass, is a place where you could have players just be from. You could have a campaign start out in a place like that. You could have players need to, for some reason, go into Nidal, up through Cheliax or through Malthun or something like that. You could have them join the Desnan Resistance. There's a Desnan Resistance that's in the Adaran Ranches, which is the closest thing to the original Horse Lords culture that you'll find in Nidal. The influence of Zon-Kuthon has had somewhat of a trouble fully infiltrating that entire place. So there's all sorts of things, but I would mostly just caution people to avoid the very high-level stuff like Pangolais, the Uskwood, for example, like the Shadow Caverns. That there's all some very high-level things in there. There's lots of Umbral dragons. That's on the cover of this book.
I mean, that tells you everything you need to know. Right there,
totally.
That's a lot to deal with.
So there's plenty of lower-level things, but I would say don't bite off more than you can chew trying to put something in a place like Pangolais or the Uskwood or something without just really paying attention to the power level of what's happening there, because you don't want players to be first level and expect all these horrible, awful things, and then you put them in Pangolais, and then nothing that they're expecting happens because it's all too high level. Yeah,
that's true. It just all has to be hand waved away because it's like, no, can't do any of that.
Yeah, it's like your janitors and then the Kuthite Cathedral.
Yeah, because that's pretty much
cool.
all you can do.
Yeah. Just don't get the attention of the joyful things otherwise.
Yeah. Let's just never talk about those again. All right, so let's do this. Let's wrap up the show, and then we'll jump into some Q&A, because there's already a couple good questions in there.
Great.
And then we'll just talk about other stuff.
Sounds great.
All right, sounds good to me. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you learned a lot about Nidal, the land of the shadows and the spookiness, and those poor fellas with the chains and the no legs and stuff, and the torture. And so, if you'd like to know more, check out Nidal, Land of Shadows. If you're going to be at PaizoCon, Leanne's going to be there, so come say hi. And maybe have her sign the book and everything like that. We're super excited to have her. And in the meantime, for Paizo, and for Amanda, and for me, Dan Kuthon.
Yeah.
Right? It threw me off. Anyways, for me, I'm your old buddy Dan, and we will see you again next time. Bye!